Grey squirrels, there are millions. An estimate said 2.5 to 3 million. There could be many more than that.
This competition problem that we have between greys and reds is something that's particular to the UK.
The grey squirrel has done is it's pushed red squirrels into small corners of the United Kingdom.
So here, the ecological niche of red and grey squirrels is very similar, and that means that their competition for food and habitat is greater.
The grey squirrel was imported from North America, and they were brought in, and then people saw them and liked them, and they got more from North America, but also they got some from places they'd already been released in the UK, started to move them around. At that time, they wouldn't have known the impact that they were going to have in the future. Science has revealed a lot of that. On just the passage of time, our understanding has changed.
The grey squirrels are quite a lot larger than red squirrels and also bolder, so they're not as frightened of humans. They spend more time on the ground, and this enables them to forage a wider range of food sources. So as such, because they eat a wider range of food, this enables them to live at far higher population densities within the woodland, and that ultimately means that they can outcompete the red squirrels for food. The red squirrel is a native tree-dwelling rodent, so they're an important part of the ecosystem of British woodlands, and they're particularly important because they spread both the seeds, the nuts and the spores of native plants and mushrooms around the forest. The amount of damage that's done by grey squirrels in British forestry is currently estimated to be about £40 million a year, and that's mostly bark stripping and removing the meristem, the growing tip, from deciduous trees. So particularly species like beech and oak are really badly affected by the grey squirrel.
Greys live at very high numbers compared with a red squirrel. And then in terms of diet, there's one significant difference between the two species. And that difference is the grey squirrel can break down tannin, which is a chemical in seed that is there to try and prevent insects from eating the seed. And that tannin locks the protein in. So an insect that eats it finds it hard to get the protein out from the seed that it's eaten because the tannin's locking it in. Grey squirrel can strip that tannin away, get the goodness out the seed, the protein. Red squirrels are less efficient. They find it harder because they've not evolved in the same types of habitat. They're competing for resources, food. Grey squirrels live at very high densities compared with reds, so you get more of them in an area of woodland than you would find with the reds. And then of course, on top of that, we have this virus called squirrelpox.
Squirrelpox virus came to the UK from America with the squirrels, and as a result of that, grey squirrels have built up an immunity to that disease, much like Europeans built up an immunity to the common cold. And when grey squirrels came to this country, they started to spread the parapox virus to red squirrels who had no antibody resistance to the disease. In the grey squirrel population, it doesn't cause mortality, but the red squirrel population had not built up that antibody, and as a result, they're badly affected by it. It can reduce their breeding and ultimately leads to their death.
So we know that it displaces the red squirrel. The native species of tree squirrel disappears when this invasive species moves into an area.
Grey squirrel population is thought to be badly affecting native bird populations. So the grey squirrel is a lot more omnivorous than a red squirrel, and they predate on eggs and baby birds. There's not a lot of research being done into that effect, but it is thought that the grey squirrel's presence is reducing the breeding success of native woodland birds.
What's clear is that grey squirrel has a significant economic impact, and often that economic impact is falling upon a small number of landowners, those that are trying to produce high quality timber. So what you find then is many people don't want to grow high quality timber, a product that is high value, because they fear that during the 30, 40, 50 years that that tree has to grow, at some point, possibly at 10 or 15 or 20 years of age, a grey squirrel will strip the bark and the tree will die. So one thing that's difficult to quantify is what economic loss is there by people deciding not to plant trees to produce timber. And then of course we've got an added cost. If we're importing timber, are we really getting it from a sustainable source? And what's the carbon cost of moving that timber from Latvia or from North America to here? So grey squirrel prohibits a very open forest, an opportunistic forest market, if you like. People are restricted on what trees they can plant and where, and if they plant high quality crop, they need to be killing grey squirrels every year.
Several charities that have been set up in the UK, including the Red Squirrel Trust Wales and Red Squirrels United, and they are spearheading conservation efforts in the UK to try and reduce the spread of the grey squirrel and to increase the population of the red squirrel in various ways, by preserving their habitat, by ensuring that trees are planted that provide food for the red squirrels.
At the moment we've got quite a lot of initiatives which are killing grey squirrels. So trapping them, shooting them. The traps can be live traps where the animal's caught and then killed later on, or they can be a kill trap that actually kills the animal. In parallel with that, there's the return of the pine marten, which is a species of carnivore that can catch squirrels in the trees. And that species is recovering from very low numbers. And where that species occurs, sometimes you get a decline in grey squirrels and reds increase. In parallel with all those things,
the Royal Forestry Society, which is a big forestry organisation within the UK, are currently looking into the possibility of developing a grey squirrel contraceptive pill, which can be put into baited feeders in areas where there's lots of greys. And the hopes is that we can therefore sterilise the grey squirrel population and reduce their population by preventing them from breeding.
We can take lots of parallels from the red squirrel, grey squirrel story. The first is you've got to intervene early when invasive species first appear in a landscape. If you leave it too late, like we did in the UK, you end up having to always hope that technology will come and help you, because old-fashioned trapping and shooting tends to be only efficient at a small scale. Once you've got them across the landscape, it's hard to find the few remaining animals if you're successful enough to remove most of them. And it's very costly as well. In the UK we call it well-being. You know, it's that longing for something that used to be there. And things are changing quite rapidly now. We have many more projects that are putting species back. And one of those species that's often talked about is red squirrel. Can we put red squirrel back into areas where it was lost? Projects to succeed need communities, and you need to include people that disagree with you, because that helps you hone your idea and change your mind. If you've got an open mind, you work with communities, they can give you an insight that's really, really useful for invasive species management. Yeah. And if you get on the wrong side of community, it's very difficult to then get back, isn't it? Almost impossible. They've got to trust you. Grey squirrels live at higher densities in woodland. That means that there are more of them. Maybe that biomass has a benefit to predators. Red squirrel's very cryptic and small, and there are less of them. Again, no one really studies these big ecological questions, because at the moment we're getting rid of grey squirrels, and I suspect a lot of grant funders aren't interested in finding out a small good point, a little tick box. So we need to simplify. It's a myth that the grey squirrels are attacking the reds. They don't do that. We need to understand a lot more about the way in which the arrival of a new species affects existing species, native species. And the grey squirrel story is a great lesson in that.